welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you today on Channel 9 on WJOP-LP Newburyport at FM 96.3 and also on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm so happy to welcome my guest today. Dr. Kurt Braddock is here. I learned about his research from an article that appeared a few weeks ago in the Boston Globe with a title that galvanized my attention: Inside the Race to Develop a Vaccine or Our Other Pandemic, Hate. Sadly, his visit couldn't be timelier. Kurt is an assistant professor of public communication at American University. His research focuses on the persuasive strategies used by violent extremist groups to recruit and radicalize audiences targeted by their propaganda, and how some of these strategies can be used to counter them. And that's what he's here to talk to us about today. Kurt, first of all, welcome. Thank you so much for taking time to visit the show.
Mary, thank you very much for having me. It's a very warm welcome.
It's an honor and a pleasure. Well, let's start with inoculation theory, Kurt. What is it and how is it modeled upon medical vaccination?
Sure. So inoculation theory is a theory of counter-persuasion that's been around for decades now. I believe the first paper written on it was in 1961. And the basic foundation of inoculation theory, it's based on medical inoculation in the idea that if you can give somebody the antibodies to a virus before they're exposed to the virus, the body can be made to prevent infection because we have those antibodies in place. In the 1960s, a gentleman named William McGuire, he theorized that maybe that we can do the same thing with ideas. So the idea of inoculation theory is that if you can let somebody know that the beliefs and attitudes that they have, if they are at risk of changing, which we tend not to like, we like to think that our beliefs and attitudes are nice and set and they're never going to change. If somebody knows that their beliefs and attitudes are at risk of changing, and then you provide them with counter arguments against the sorts of persuasive threats they're going to face, then they'll be more equipped to resist persuasion by those messages when they encounter them in the real world, in the same way the body defends against viruses when it's equipped with the antibodies from the vaccine.
It's such a hopeful, inoculation theory is very hopeful. We seem to need them more now than ever, Kurt. So could you talk a little bit about what are today's dangerous conditions that they're designed to prevent or protect us from?
Well, in terms of the kinds of ideas that are circulating that I do in my work and the work that we do at the Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab at American University, we've noticed that conspiracy theories, different kinds of hate speech, different kinds of extremist group propaganda. For the last several years, especially since the mid-2010s and the ascension of Trump, that these sorts of ideas have gained a lot of momentum in the online space. And many people who might not otherwise be exposed to these ideas are being exposed to them. So in the work that I do, I hope that by using attitudinal inoculation, by developing campaigns that can protect people against these ideas, that we can protect them from being persuaded by them and then taking up arms or engaging in violence on behalf of them. Unfortunately, we saw just 2 days ago what happens when an individual buys into one of these conspiracy theories, in this case, the Great Replacement theory. And unfortunately, it came with deadly consequences.
Yeah, heartbreaking and deadly consequences. Well, you published a 2019 study that was talked about in the Boston Globe article I read called Vaccinating Against Hate. Could you describe your methodology and the results of the study?
Yeah, of course. So this was the first of the inoculation studies that I did and the ones that we built a lot of our work at American University on. In this study, I took McGuire's original idea and said, okay, if this works again in things like health communication, more traditional political communication, interpersonal communication, why would it not work for extremist propaganda? So what I did was I took a group of individuals, just kind of a random sample of Americans. I believe it was somewhere around 360 people. And I put them into five different groups. Two of those groups were exposed to an inoculation message meant to protect them against right-wing propaganda. In this case, it was white supremacist, white nationalist kind of propaganda. And 2 groups were exposed to an inoculation message protecting against left-wing propaganda, which was very kind of anarchist, anti-government kind of propaganda modeled on the old Weather Underground. And then there was one group who was not inoculated whatsoever. Now, on each side, the individuals were given an inoculation message that was posed as coming from myself as the researcher, and another inoculation message that was posed as coming from a former member of the group from the propaganda they were going to be exposed to. So after these individuals were inoculated, they were then exposed to left or right-wing propaganda. And then after they were exposed to it, I took some measures to see how much they agreed with the message, how credible they found the source, how angry they got when they read it. And what I found was pretty striking. I found that regardless of what kind of propaganda you inoculate against, regardless of who the inoculation message comes from, inoculation consistently prevents persuasion by the extremist propaganda in a couple of really, really kind of interesting ways. Number one, I found that it does reduce the credibility of the group that produces the propaganda. I found that it increases what's called reactance, and reactance is a combination of anger and counter argument. It's kind of that feeling you get when you're in the store trying to window shop and somebody comes over and wants to sell you something.
Yes.
That negative feeling you get, that's reactance. So it increases that. And then the most exciting part was, as you decrease the group's credibility and you increase reactance, those two combine to reduce the individual's intention to support the group, either with money, logistics support, spreading their propaganda online, and most importantly, picking up a gun. So inoculation seemed to be effective across the board for both kinds of propaganda, both kinds of sources. And that was kind of the first foundational brick that I laid to study this sort of thing.
It's very encouraging, Kurt. It seems as though what you're doing is creating, in effect, cognitive white blood cells.
I actually, it's funny.
Resist.
It's funny you say that. I often use the term almost kind of tongue in cheek, psychological antibodies. I use that in some of my research, and that's almost how it works. It's meant to work in the exact same way as the immune system.
Yeah. Well, in a way, it's similar to, teaching people to think critically and priming them, though, for some of the arguments that they're likely to encounter, so they're prepared to have a more questioning kind of attitude, to think it through for yourself, in other words. And that's part of what those cognitive white blood cells do. So, yay. Those are really great, encouraging results.
That is the biggest strength, I think, is that so much of counter-radicalization strategy has been focused on trying to get to people after they've already adopted the ideology and talking them out of what they already believe. It's much easier to prevent somebody from going down that rabbit hole than it is to pull them out of that rabbit hole. So that's one major benefit of this theory. The other major benefit is, and this kind of goes up against a lot of the critiques that's focused on government counter messaging, is that when people are exposed to a lot of kind of government counter messages that challenge terrorist propaganda or extremist propaganda, they see it as a challenge against their own ability to make their own decisions. And there's this reverse effect. But inoculation, like you said, it helps build resilience in a way that we say, listen, we know you're not violent. We know you don't have any intentions to become violent. We just want to help you develop the critical thinking skills to prevent you from going down that rabbit hole, because people like you have been persuaded in the past, and we want to help you be able to think for yourself.
Yeah. Which is really a message that affirms a person's individuality and independent mind. And those are very positive and affirmative messages to give somebody. So that sounds really wonderful, Kurt. I can't tell you how glad I am you're doing this research.
I appreciate that.
What can you tell us about some current research that was mentioned in the article that I read that was funded by the Department of Homeland Security, I believe, they described it as road testing inoculation against new bits of disinformation that begin to circulate on the internet almost as they begin to circulate, kind of analogous to the idea of new variants of the coronavirus developing and the race to develop a new variant of the vaccine that will attack and prevent those new variants from gaining power.
That's actually a great analogy, because so much of the disinformation and propaganda that comes from some of these extremist groups and organizations, they really are just kind of subtle tweaks on existing conspiracies and disinformation. So what you read about in the Boston Globe article relates to a 2-year project I've been working on, funded by the Department of Homeland Security, whereby I want to test what I did in that 2019 study, but using real world data. So what we're doing, or what I'm about 2/3 of the way through doing, is identifying strands of disinformation that maybe haven't hit the mainstream yet, but are coming down the pipeline in the next year, 2 years, 5 years. And I did that by pulling together about 20 to 25 of the foremost experts in extremism and disinformation in the world. And this was just in March. And through our discussions, we identified a couple of different strands. So now we're in the process of writing up the experiment that we're going to do and identifying where in the United States this kind of disinformation is most likely to resonate. And so we're going to be performing an experiment in those regions among individuals who are vulnerable to persuasion by this kind of propaganda, to see whether or not it actually works using real world in real time data. And everything seems to show that it will. So fingers crossed it bears out.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Well,
totally.
there's other work that we're doing as well, like not through the DHS, but through my work at Peril at American University. We've been doing inoculation studies for about 1.5 years now, where we're testing it against different kinds of strands of disinformation and extremist propaganda. So some of the inoculation work we've been doing has been testing against things like race science. So the idea that non-white individuals are biologically inferior to white individuals, to things like the Great Replacement theory would be another one. Things like we'd see coming from the incel community, so very sexist type propaganda. And across the board, we see that inoculation seems to be working. So I'm very hopeful that we're going to see it work in this DHS study as well.
Yeah, it's very exciting research. I'm curious to find out, Kurt, given the vastness and the speed of the internet, how do you foresee being able to present the inoculation messages at scale, so to speak, given that, you know, lies and disinformation travel at the speed of light on the internet?
Yeah, so something that we're actually very good at, and this comes with working with people who are much smarter than me, that can do computer modeling and identify how information flows through different kinds of networks. Basically, we can identify small nodes of users, whether they are actual Americans or they are kind of foreign adversaries meant to instill polarization in the US. We've gotten good at identifying kind of where they hang out, and we've gotten good at understanding the kinds of information that when they spread it, when it will go through these social networks and then kind of go viral. So we've gotten pretty good at identifying that. In terms of developing these sorts of things at scale, what I'm currently doing, both as part of the DHS project and kind of on my own time and through my own research, is working with communities, like small communities around the United States and some in Europe, where they have a vested interest in protecting their citizens from this kind of disinformation. So you're absolutely right in that information moves at the speed of light on the internet. And government developed counter messaging programs. I mean, the government, for all its power, it turns very slowly, and it's very difficult to get these things out fast enough. So the key is working with organizations in local communities where individuals feel as though that the citizens in those communities are at risk of being persuaded by this stuff. So I've been doing inoculation trainings to these communities to help them develop their own inoculation messages in real time, rather than need to turn to the government and do it. So it's kind of a give a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach a man to fish and he eats for a lifetime. So I'm trying to help people understand how they can build resilience in their communities, using the knowledge they have of those communities and making use of their relationships with the people they hope to protect.
I think that's brilliant. It's a kind of grassroots inoculation.
Yeah, I mean, it starts very high level. I mean, the government has resources to help produce this kind of research, but I do think not even with inoculation, but any kind of messaging campaign meant to protect people against extremist messages, extremist propaganda, and disinformation, people react to their friends, their family, their community members. They don't react to governments. and rightfully so. I mean, people have there's a lot of reasons people have distrust of governments, and there's been reason for them to distrust those governments.
Yeah.
But when we can give these communities the tools they need to protect their citizens, I think that's where the power is. That is where we can actually make this stuff work.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious to ask you about the current. Well, our reading about inoculation theory changed the way that I was responding to some of the news that's been going on about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. At the beginning, I was intrigued to see the Biden administration seemingly applying inoculation theory to Russian disinformation, because they immediately started saying that we should anticipate that Russia would talk about false flag attempts to blame Ukraine for its invasion of their own country. And I was intrigued by this, having read about your research, and I'm curious to find out, is that how you see what the administration was doing? And do you think it's proven to be an effective strategy in shaping skepticism about Russia's disinformation campaign about the invasion of Ukraine?
It's certainly part of it. I think that was a very deliberate strategic communication device that the Biden administration used. That is basically the first step in developing an inoculation message, is let people know that these kinds of persuasive attempts are coming. What the Biden administration didn't do as the second part of the inoculation message, which I don't think it's either right nor wrong, it's just that they didn't do this part, is the second part would be where you develop the counter messages to let people, or the counter arguments to let people fight back against the disinformation they're going to encounter. But just by simply undermining the messages that, sure enough, the Russians did come out with about false flag attacks and things like that, I think it was really successful in undermining their information operations. What we've seen, I think, in Ukraine in terms of counter-information warfare combined with the successes that Ukraine's had in fighting the Russians on the battlefield, I think it's been a huge success so far. Of course, it's tragic how many Ukrainians have been lost already, but the fact that Ukraine seems to be having so much success, not just on the battlefield, but they're winning the war in the public courtroom in terms of information, I think that all speaks to the sorts of things that the Biden administration has done, the things that the Zelensky administration has done in Ukraine, and the successes they've had on the ground. So I do think that kind of half of an inoculation message that the Biden administration put out has borne fruit in terms of undermining Russian propaganda.
Well, thanks for that, Kurt. It makes perfect sense what you're saying. And I hope it continues to be as effective as it's proven, because it has galvanized worldwide support badly needed for the Ukrainian people.
It also, something inoculation does too, is that when the Biden administration talked about the false flag operation claims and things like that, and Russia went ahead and did it anyway and made those claims, that has almost exponential benefit, because it proves that the Biden administration was proven right. So now anything that the Russians say seems to, it has this air of dishonesty about it. So it's not just beneficial in the near term, it's beneficial in the far term as well. So I do think it was a bit of a stroke of genius to come out with that early in the goings on of the war.
Yeah, once those cognitive white blood cells are operative, they're going to stay operative. It will create more skepticism and more encouragement of people to think independently and for themselves. So
very much.
Yeah. Well, I'm also curious, maybe you can help me with something that really baffles me. So there seem to be so many minds in America that are so malleable, Kurt, open to extremist views or incendiary and hate-mongering distortions. And at the same time, so many people have so much distrust. You referenced that earlier, of the government, of science, of facts, I guess. Certainly institutions of every kind. See, people seem willing to believe just utter nonsense about Jewish space lasers, or JFK Jr. is going to be resurrected in Texas. And a lot of these come from a source like Q, when they don't even know what or whom Q is or who funds Q. It's like trusting the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, deciding that you're just gonna trust the Wizard of Oz. And I know that we all have confirmation bias. We tend to believe things that we want to believe. But this seems beyond that to me, because it seems so irrational, even delusional, paranoid delusional in some cases. What do you
Mhm.
make of this, Kurt?
Well, it's been interesting to watch. I'll give you that much. I have noticed that what you said is correct, and that it's kind of gone beyond even what I would expect people to buy into. Much of what I've seen, especially in the QAnon movement, and I'm very hesitant to use this term because it has a very, very specific meaning to me in terms of psychology and social processes. But a lot of what's happening with the QAnon movement, it models what happens with cults. There is an excellent book for anybody listening who's interested in understanding this kind of thing, written in the 1950s, called When Prophecy Fails. And what that book was this was I think this was before there were like review boards to see what researchers were doing, but a researcher sent research assistants into this UFO cult to see what would happen when what they prophesized didn't happen. And what they found, or what you would read in the book, it models almost perfectly what we see happening with QAnon when the prophecies don't come true. Basically, you have about a third of the people say, okay, this is clearly disinformation, and I can't waste any more time or resources on it. About another third just kind of fold back into the group and go, okay, well, maybe next time. And about a third double down. So what you end up getting is this kind of reduction sauce of individuals who believe in this disinformation. So it's been really interesting to see, and a little bit disheartening to see that people are willing to put so many eggs in that particular basket. Something I'm kind of heartened to see, though, and this is anecdotally, I don't know of any studies to look at this empirically yet, although I think it would probably bear it out, is that it looks as though that people are becoming almost fatigued with things like the QAnon movement. People in the movement have been disappointed too many times, and they're finding it harder and harder to maintain their momentum. That doesn't mean they're going anywhere. It doesn't mean that there aren't individuals in that group that aren't dangerous, but they do seem to be losing a bit of momentum. With respect to this kind of disinformation and people who have already bought into it, there is a new line of research in inoculation that shows that inoculation messages can help kind of inch people away, even after they've already gone down that rabbit hole. That you can help pull people back a little bit. It doesn't work as well as it does if you get there beforehand, but it does have some benefit. So that might be one route to go about helping get people to disavow this disinformation. But in terms of what I make of it, in terms of where it comes from, I do think that the former administration has done a huge number on public trust just by sowing distrust in so many of our democratic institutions. And it's going to take years, maybe decades, to get back to a point where individuals believe science and believe data. And I think that the damage of that, I can't even express how damaging that is to the body politic and the democratic institutions themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. That's very helpful. And I'm going to check that book out because it sounds like it's very relevant to today's
It's such a good book.
situation.
It is it's such an interesting read. Even if you're not into social science, it's so interesting to hear about the inner workings of a cult.
Mhm. And just how the mind is capable of working. So it
Very
sounds
much.
fascinating, Kurt. Well, we're
Mhm.
just about out of time for our interview, Kurt, but one final question. How can people learn more about your research, inoculation theory, and maybe since you were talking about kind of the way you work at grassroots, if people are concerned about their community and feel like they could benefit from learning how to do some of these strategies, where can people look?
Sure. Well, if you want to learn about kinds of counter messaging theories, inoculation, so-called counter narratives, alternative narratives, the way that messages can invoke emotions to be counter persuasive for extremist propaganda. I always feel weird doing it, but I have written a book on these things. It's called Weaponized Words, the Strategic Role of Persuasion in Violent Radicalization and Counter-Radicalization. If you're interested in following the kind of work that I do and kind of my snark and pictures of my dog, you can follow me on Twitter at my name, Kurt Braddock. And we are doing a lot of good work in the School of Communication at American University and at the Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab, also known as PERIL, P-E-R-I-L, also at American University. That's where a lot of the inoculation work is going on. And that's where a lot, I think, of these kinds of campaigns, that's where they're going to be informed. So check out any of those and it'll give you a little more information on this kind of thing. And for any listeners, if you're interested in any of the studies that have been done, let me know and I'd be happy to pass them along.
All right. Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Kurt, for taking time to visit the show and talk about this, but also just from the bottom of my heart, thank you for the research that you've tackled and for the transformative work that you're doing, because we're a world in peril right now. And we really need to be inoculated against the forces that will pull us apart and take us into parts of our mind where we're vulnerable to, well, let's name a spade, certain forms of lunacy that can lead us to violence. And so for that, I just absolutely thank you. It's important work, and I thank you for doing it. And thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy day to visit the morning show. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Kurt.
No, it's been absolutely my pleasure. Thanks, Mary.
All right, thank you. And now I'm so happy to welcome my next guests who are here to talk about what sounds like a really fun event that will be happening in Newburyport, the Favorite Poem Project 2022. And here to discuss this and teach us about it are Debbie Sabo, creative writing and English teacher at Newburyport High School, and 3 of her students. So Debbie, first of all, welcome. Thank you so much for taking time to visit the show and talk to us about this project.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And next we have 2 students, actually. Olivia D'Ambrosio is here. Olivia, hello and welcome. Thanks for visiting the morning show.
Hi, thank you for having us.
My pleasure. And Sophia Hartford is here. And Sophia, welcome. Thanks so much for taking time to visit the morning show.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And let's see, and Charlie Grossman is here, joining us as we speak. Charlie, welcome. Thank you so much for visiting the morning show. I really appreciate it. I think you're maybe muted, Charlie.
Yes, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. It's wonderful to have you all here. Well, Debbie, I was thinking perhaps you could start just by telling us a little bit about how did the Favorite Poem Project begin and what's its purpose?
Okay, well, I would love to take credit for this beautiful idea, but it was not really originally my idea. The idea came from Robert Pinsky, who is the 39th Poet Laureate of America. And he, back in 1997, when he was the Poet Laureate, got this idea that he really wanted to bring poetry to everybody. And that actually he didn't even need to do it, that many, many people from all walks of life did enjoy poetry and didn't perceive it as some kind of torment that they had to go through in school.
Yeah.
And so he began the Favorite Poem Project, and he put out a call for submissions all across America. He got over 18,000 submissions.
Oh, wow.
And they were from people of varying races, all the different states, different genders, different religions, several of them in languages that were not English, from immigrants whose first language was something other than English. And he compiled them in a book, not all of them. He chose some and put them in a book. And actually, I have here this is the second book. You can get these books and they're absolutely wonderful. But the other thing that he did along with his graduate student was he started recording videos with a videographer. So if you Google the Favorite Poem Project, Robert Pinsky, you can see some really fabulous videos. I took a course with Robert Pinsky in the summer of 2002 that was largely based around the Favorite Poem Project with a bunch of other teachers. And as soon as he started talking about it, I thought this is something that we could do in Newburyport. Newburyport is just the kind of community for this kind of project, because part of what happens is it just brings everyone together. You know, you see these people who you would never ordinarily see, you know, a construction worker reading Walt Whitman, you know, and people say Walt Whitman, poet of democracy, and you go, yeah. But when you actually see a construction worker on the construction site and you hear him read the poem and talk about what it means to him, it's amazing. So really the project became much more than Pinsky thought it would be. It was really a community building, world community building event. And that was it. I took off and I brought it to my creative writing class at the time, and everyone went, cool, let's do it. And we had the first one in 2003. We've had the youngest student, I think the youngest participant we had was 4. I know the oldest participant we had, I know, was 103. when she
Okay.
participated.
Well,
So,
obviously, Robert Pinsky hit a chord when he sent out that request. And it sounds as though it really has built a community of people who love poetry and connect to it, who might not otherwise perhaps have, I assume, discovered one another.
well, and it's not necessarily people who love poetry. There are some people who came to the Favorite Poet Project just because like their neighbor was in it, or their priest was in it. You know, we really try. Olivia can speak more to how we try to get local politicians, clergymen, you know, people who a lot of people know in the community. So part of what it does also is make people think about, oh, maybe I do like poetry after all, if their only experiences have been negative, which unfortunately it has been for some people.
Well, that sounds like a really wonderful outcome then, to have people come because they're there to support somebody and then find out, oh my gosh, I really like this.
Exactly.
So that's extraordinary. Well, let's talk a little bit more about what actually takes place during the project. Whoever would like to describe that for us. So, would one of the students like to talk about what happens during the project?
So it's a very low-key but community-oriented event. We'll have kind of an introduction, and then all the readers will get up in front of their friends and family and guests, and they'll read aloud their favorite poem and say a short little something about what it means to them, why they chose it. Sometimes we'll have people read once in English and then once in their native tongue, or we'll have sometimes there's songs or it's sung. So it's really up to the speaker to kind of show how the poem resonates with them, and they really have the creative freedom to convey that in whatever way they want. And like Zabo said, a lot of people do come out, and family and friends come, and it's just a great event to see everyone. And we're just there to read poetry and to listen to why poems are important to others.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like a lot of fun. In addition to the community building, it just sounds like a lot of fun. There's a curiosity, I would think, that about, especially if it's somebody you know, what poem will they choose? And what will they say about why they chose it? So it sounds like really a lot of fun. That said, though, I'm curious to find out from each of you students, what made each of you decide that you wanted to participate in the Favorite Poem Project? Whoever would like to begin. Olivia, do you want to start?
Sure. So I've taken Ms. Sabo's creative writing at night class for 2 years, and I've been going to our poetry soups for longer than that. I just really love writing and poetry, and last year when Zabo was kind of talking about it in class, it just sounded like something I would be interested in. So I found more information about it and got more involved.
Excellent. Great. Charlie, how about you?
Yeah, similar to Olivia, I've only been in the class for 1 year, but since freshman year, I've been going to these post soups, and Miss Zava has just done a lovely job of creating a community around poetry, and I just sort of see the Favorite Poem Project as an extension of that, and it's a really beautiful thing.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. And how about you, Sophia? Oh,
Hi,
Sophia,
sorry.
there you are. Sophia out there on this beautiful day. Hi. What made
hi.
you want to be part of the project?
I did it when I was a lot younger. So I must have been 8 or 9. And I haven't done it since, but this year when Zabo asked if I wanted to do it, I kind of had forgotten about it. So I think that I'm going to try to do it again this year. Just, yeah, I love poetry. I love reading poetry. I love writing poetry. So.
And, you know, having done it when you were 8 or 9, you have to go back and see how it feels now that you're a high school student and see what feels the same and what feels different. But that's really great. I'm glad that all of you have decided to be part of it. And the enthusiasm that you have for poetry is a wonderful thing to witness. So, Debbie, if we could come back to you, let's talk about people will submit poems, and we can make sure everybody understands. At the end of the program, we'll go back to that, how they can submit their poem. And what will you be looking for as you curate these poems, and how many will you select to be part of the reading?
Well, we usually select 24 poems. That number is a little bit fluid. We tell all the speakers they can have no more than 3 minutes to read their poem and say a few words about it. I've found after all my years of teaching that most people don't listen to anybody after 3 minutes. So
yeah,
seems to be enough.
It may be wired into our brain.
I think so. I think so. And it may be getting shorter with all of the advent
Yeah.
of technology. I don't know, but people can usually hold on for 3 minutes, I think. And really, I try to do what Pinsky did and wanted to do, which is to create some diversity. So I thought Sophia was going to talk about, I imagine her teacher must have encouraged or coerced or cajoled. Is that true, Sophia?
Yeah, I think there was some influence there.
But to a good end.
So, you know, I mean, we reach out to some teachers, anyone we can reach out to. So we try to get a smattering of children, teenagers, adults. As I mentioned before, we like to get the mayor, the former mayors have always come. I hope our new mayor will come too. We've had city councilors, and sometimes I will ask people, you know, to send some identifying information, such as their age. And that's not like I care how old anyone is, but we don't want, I could fill the program with, you know, women over 65 because they're my friends, you know. So, but that would not be as exciting and as interesting. It's really fascinating. And of course, the kids usually steal the show because they're really cute, but there are all kinds of surprises. And I also try to reach out as best I can to the immigrant community because people love hearing poems in different languages.
Oh, I'll bet.
And just if all you get is the sound, it's amazing how, because poetry and music are so closely related, just the sound alone can really impact people. And it's also just a nice way to welcome immigrants into our community.
Yeah, and also to, I'm sure that the diverse group that you bring have such a diverse taste and interest in poetry, and their presence alone is a way of building community and diversity. And I think that's always a healthy thing. So thank you for that description.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious to find out, and I think I'll ask the students to respond to this. So what do you think makes it worthwhile, beneficial for people to spend 90 minutes on a Sunday afternoon attending this event? And again, whoever would like to begin. So, Charlie, would you like to begin? Or Olivia, either one.
That would be lovely. Why is it worthwhile? For all the same reasons that poetry is worthwhile, really. I think that poetry is, it's easy to know facts, and it's easy to be smart, but to make your body and actually hear it and feel it, it's very different. And I think, and it doesn't always have to be dramatic or really deep, but it can be poetry can help you fully feel how lovely a summer day is, you know.
Well, that was an excellent inducement, Charlie. You make it sound really appealing. Olivia, how about you?
Well, like Zabo kind of was alluding to earlier, a lot of times people's first introduction to poetry is in a school environment, and it's not always a positive one. And I think, in my opinion, it's because we're not choosing exactly what we're reading. It's not something that's necessarily of interest to us. But what the Favorite Poem Project does is all the readers get to choose exactly what they'd like to be reading, exactly what they'd like to convey. And I think it's just a whole new side to poetry, because everyone's so passionate, because it was their choice. No one's telling them you have to read this poem, you have to analyze this. It's really coming from their heart and soul, and it's not like a very in-depth analysis, which they're just simply sharing why it's their favorite. I also think it's a great community event, and it's just a really fun time.
Also, a really good inducement to come. And Sophia, are you still there? What about you? We'll give her a minute to see if she's able to arise. Well, I thought it would be interesting to model some of what happens, the nature of the Favorite Poem Project. So would you students, would you be willing perhaps to share an example one of your favorite poems or part of a poem, and what your connection is to it, what makes it stand out to you. Whoever would like to begin, either Charlie or Olivia, either one.
I can begin.
Thanks, Charlie.
What do you think, Mrs. Albo? Should I go for a whole sonnet or should I just do the sestet?
Oh, you've got to do what your heart tells you to do. That's the whole point of the program.
Oh, good
right.
answer.
I'll do the
Good
whole
answer.
sonnet then. This is by Pablo Neruda. He's from Chile. He's really lovely. It's a translation by Mark Eisner. It's his 17th love sonnet. And I love it because I've known it since sophomore year, and I learned it for a recitation project thing. And I think it'll be really apparent why I love it. It's all about love. I don't love you as if you were a rose of salt, topaz, or an arrow of carnations that propagate fire. I love you as one loves certain obscure things, secretly between the shadow and the soul. I love you as the plant that does not bloom, but carries the light of those flowers hidden within itself, and thanks to your love, the tight aroma that arose from the earth lives dimly in my body. I love you without knowing how, or when, or from where. I love you directly, without problems or pride. I love you like this because I don't know any other way to love, except in this form which I am not, nor are you. So close that your hand upon my chest is mine, so close that your eyes close with my dreams.
Whoa, Charlie, that's beautiful. Oh my gosh, I felt it in my heart. Well, I felt it physically while you were reading it. I understand, why you like that poem, and I really appreciate your sharing it with me. I'm going to have to look that up and print it out so I can read it again and again. Thank you, Charlie. Olivia, how about you?
All right, so similar to Charlie, coincidentally, I also have known this poem since sophomore year for the same exact project. I think going back to my point earlier, it's a great example of how powerful language can be when you're the one choosing it. Yeah. So we did actually get to choose our poems for this project. It's called Cecina in Prose by Catherine Coles. And for me, it's just kind of a metaphor about life, but you can kind of choose to interpret it in the grand scheme of things or quite simply. And to me, that's really beautiful. All right, so here we go. Cecina in Prose by Catherine Coles. It was like climbing a mountain to those of us who'd climbed one. To the others, it was like, I suppose, something else. In other words, we let everybody find her own figure of speech. Not that it lay thick on the ground or mountain, it presented itself one word at a time far between. A body had to keep an eye out, like for firewood at dusk, or else miss her chance. Nobody else, let's face it, cared about metaphor, or even simile, the like it or notness of the mountain pretty much getting between a body and her musing in its going. One step at a time. Anyone could lose herself or someone else just staring at her feet. And if a body meet a body is not mere speech, but something that could happen, like hopping a bus. Though on the mountain, you'll catch no rides, worse luck. The mountain requires to be climbed on foot, one after the other. Nothing else will get you up it. There's nothing like such obduracy, but in the wild, nobody can tell you otherwise. No simple figure, the struggle, just a crag, your burden, and your own 2 feet. Say otherwise, talk through your hat, which I don't care for. Thank you.
That's a terrific poem. It is life, isn't it? Charlie and Olivia, you just added to my supply of favorite poems, so thank you so much for that. And you both read so well. Thank you for sharing those. Really appreciate it. And I think it's time now to return to Debbie and ask you to remind us, how can people enter? Where do they submit their favorite poems? And then say something about where and when the reading will be held.
Okay, thank you. They can be submitted. Well, we've put some flyers up around town. So if you see a flyer, you can just tear off a little piece. It is my email address at school, which you can find if you go online to Newburyport High School. It's so much, I'll say it, but it's DSZABO@newburyport.edu. k12.ma.us.
Yeah.
Which, those of you affiliated with the public school system, you know that. But that's really the best way. If you mail it to Newburyport High School, care of Debbie Sabo, if you do snail mail, I would get it that way as well. And I just wanted to let you know, I got a message from someone else who somehow Sophia can, probably her neighbor, saying her phone overheated. She won't be able to get back on the call. So she apologizes, but she has not been overwhelmed by a poem or anything. She's okay.
Well, we enjoyed having her here as long as we could.
And the other thing I wanted to add, I was thinking about it when the students were reading. It's not just the diversity of the speakers that's so interesting, but the diversity of the poems.
Yeah.
So we've had Pablo Neruda followed by Shel Silverstein.
Well, it's a big world, poetry.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are so many different kinds of poems. So I don't want people to feel like it has to be a bearing of their souls, because it really does not. It's whatever works. What else? And so the actual event is going to be on the afternoon of June 12th, which is a Sunday. It's going to be outdoors behind the Custom House. I'm not positive if it's going to be 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. But it will be either 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, and hopefully the daily news and flyers will be around that will advertise the exact time. But if you want to make sure, come at 2. You can always talk to some of the students and have a good time.
Absolutely.
You can tell they were a lot of fun.
Oh, it sounds like a huge amount of fun. And I imagine people could also call the Custom House, because they will know what's happening there. That's a beautiful space too, behind the Custom House for any kind of program. And if the weather continues to be as nice as it is, it'll be just lovely to be there. Well, I can't thank all of you enough. It's been so much fun to have you visit the morning show. Charlie and Olivia, thank you so much for those poems. They're really wonderful. I enjoyed hearing them. You both read them beautifully. And I'm really just touched and excited by the passion that you all share for poetry and your eloquence about the positive impact that it has on you and how it builds community. So thank you all so much.
Well, we hope you'll send us a poem, Mary. We'll be waiting for it.
Well, in our email exchange said, and you had the right answer. I said, how do you choose one? And you said you choose one of. And it's been going on for 20 years. It's going to keep going. So whatever you didn't choose this year, you can submit the following year. So thank you all so much. It's been just a joy to have you on the morning show. I really appreciate it. Thank you all so much. You all take care now.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye-bye.